Thanks, everyone. So, is there anything more beautiful than a field of ripening wheat? Steve Jones, US wheat breeder and director of Washington State University's Bread Lab, is fond of pointing out that the Great Impressionists certainly didn't paint lettuce. There's no plant more central to the development of our civilisation, from the formation of city-states to the Arab Spring, from World War II trade control to the Ukraine. Wheat is often at the heart of things, the kernel of kernels. The decisions we make around it are no small thing. So it's been a great privilege to look at wheat in fields, shipyards, labs, trial sites, microscopes, mills, bakeries and malt houses at exotic locales around the world, and to consider our culture and the diversity of structures that underpin our economy through the lens of wheat. Thank you, Nuffield Australia, and my sponsor, the William Buckland Foundation, fellow scholars and my family. The last 3 years have been both different to and exactly as the brochure promised. Growth in my professional and personal development and national and global connections that have benefited my business. It's been quite a ride. I remember being here receiving my scholarship from Andrew Fowler in Brisbane in 2019, and they announced Jason Cotter growing grain on 60 hectares on the Mornington Peninsula. And I was, is that a typo? Right. So anyway, as Andrew shook my hand for the photo, I said to him, I suppose you've got 6,000 hectares. And he leant over and he said, 49. So I appreciate the broad church that is Nuffield and for recognising the glint in my eye. So this is me, 2015, full head of hair, totally ripped. But geez, I was green in the guts when I ate some kinds of bread. And I wasn't alone in this reaction. There's a growing number of people who aren't celiacs. They've started to give bread a bad name with their bloated bellies and bad smells. And I wondered, was it the type of wheat, how it was grown or how it was processed that was upsetting me? So I thought, I'll make my own bread. 8 years later, we've grown hundreds of different types of wheat, barley and rye on our farm, elsewhere in Victoria and more recently in Tasmania. I particularly like ultra-modern, high-yielding, high-protein hard red wheats for the high rainfall zone, heritage wheats with great flavour, digestion profile and cultural history, and a few genetic oddities that satisfy the seed hunter in me, like Triticum zolkowski. Many lines were collected in the Northern Hemisphere and imported through quarantine or accessed through the Australian Grains Gene Bank, which is the third largest cereals collection in the world, and will be at the core of a GRDC-funded Grains Innovation Initiative. The samples we sometimes bring in are only 5 grams. We trial them in our climate and we select lines with traits not directly catered for in the commodity system. We also mill flour on our farm and we sell it to chefs, bakers and home cooks, and we export flour to Asia and once a year a modest amount of grain to the Gulf states. We've recently opened an on-farm sourdough bakery overlooking the wheat to test our grain and sell bread locally, and I no longer get crook in the guts when I eat bread. So a quick recap of the last 10,000 years of wheat. Promise I won't go on too long and I'll keep the last 70 years short. Wheat is a highly diverse plant. The wheat genome is 5 times the size of the human genome, and different wheats have different protein profiles, architecture, physiology, and some other various traits we use to meet our needs. Over the course of its long history, our relationship with wheat has changed as our societies has changed, and wheat's changed too. It's amazing the yields we achieve today. The work that goes into pathogen resistance, for instance, is phenomenal. What Dr. Robert Park does on rust at Cobbitty is relied upon around the world. And we're justly proud of our legacy of wheat breeding in Australia. Yet along the way, some qualities of wheat can drop off. Our growing and processing prioritises industrial efficiency over, say, nutritional density and fibre content. So too has the farmer become gradually detached from the end use of grain. The connection to consumer is indirect and a long way distant, with many links in the chain in between. There's a global movement of breeders and farmers working with millers, bakers, maltsters, brewers and distillers, value chain participants who you might call end users, who want to reincorporate wider different definitions of quality and prioritise consumer choice in how they delineate themselves in the food system. Grain diversity is central to this effort. So I talked to a lot of people in 3 years, a lot of time on the mill, milling flour. The first year of the pandemic was very good for flour. I met with businesses in a similar vein to my own, but a little further on. Research and development institutions considering definitions of quality and diversity. Commodity grain system entities to better understand the broader market. So this is Fred Price in Somerset. A decade ago, Fred was going backwards in his small 200 hectare farm, mainly due to input costs. He had to get out or get big. Then he found another way. He now has what you might term a value-added agroecological approach, focusing on community, increasing soil health and biodiversity, and incidentally building a brand to which consumers respond. He turns out 70% forage-fed pigs from a herbal lays cover crop system, and the organic pork is sold from an on-farm butcher's run by his brother-in-law. He also grows cereal crops, and with other members of the South West Grain Alliance, a collection of farmers, small-scale millers and bakers, he operates a mill supplying bakeries from Bristol to Cornwall, including a bakery on his own farm. Fred works with connections from NIAB and Harper Adams and other members of grain alliances in the UK to build genetically diverse populations suitable for low or no input systems. His business is successful, but it was clear his connection to land and the community of people it feeds was far more important to his personal sense of well-being and success. This is Carlos Guzman. For 10 years, he was the head of quality at CIMMIT. He's now at Córdoba University's Plant Genetics Wheat Quality Lab Leader. And he confirmed what we often aim for genetically in breeding is distinct from what best is suited to the end user across a range of parameters. Carlos shared research on diversity in health and nutrition needs and traits. Essentially, everyone's different. So nutritional value is hard to pin down. And on genetic diversity in grain, we need not worry anymore. A great rediversification is underway. We spoke on achieving high functionality at lower protein and lower input too. His lab was also screening durum lines from across a millennia of back catalogue genetics, looking for potential parents to develop high fibre durum. His department was working closely with AgroVegetal, a farmers' co-op that develops its own locally adapted seed stock that rivals and in some cases surpasses the material from the French seed giants. It's Bob Quinn in Montana, who was 5 years into his 3-year retirement plan when we met. Bob was a great embodiment of that particular American blend of entrepreneurship and adherence to God's plan. And Bob had built a small empire on the prairie centred around an ancient durum that he gave the now trademark name Kamut, the Egyptian word for wheat. He established Kamut International, which licenses the brand name globally, stipulating this low-yielding, unimproved ancestor wheat be grown organically within a tested and traced supply chain. Consumers respond to its great flavour. The myth that a US soldier returning from a war took home a sample of wheat from a tomb of King Tut isn't quite true. But who doesn't want to eat like a pharaoh? And a good story is second to none in branding. So a small group of growers around the world supply domestic and export markets, and the Italian market takes 70% of the annual crop for pasta production. And I get calls probably every 3 months from mainly in Asia for people looking for this under-branded Kamut Khorasan. So Kamut branding is an instance where flavour is linked to nutrition and sustainability. It tastes great, so people buy it and then they engage with the secondary values like health benefits. It has stripe rust issues too. So the Bread Lab is a bit of a lighthouse in the alternative grain system world. Dr. Jones, the lighthouse keeper. He's on the right, standing in a field of blue perennial wheat with Keith Kissler, a farmer he collaborates with on the high rainfall zone Olympic Peninsula. Both started out in eastern Washington, where the wheats are as short as the haircuts. But now, west of the Cascades, Jones heads a breeding program with values of diversity, sustainability, health and flavour at its core. So they're known for releasing population wheats with infield genetic diversity and climate resilience, and with all quality testing done exclusively with wholemeal flour. Research includes perennial wheat, coloured wheats, barley's bred for flavour for the whisky market, cereal rye for eating and distilling, and the importance of increasing fibre in the diet, and actually the per hectare efficiency and economic benefits of using whole grain flour. It's interesting to note that our business has more connections with this university than we do with local universities, but we're making steps to change that. So French Nuffield scholar Laura Figueroa-Bedard, forgive me, Laura, introduced me to French farmer miller bakers, co-ops similar in structure to CBH, and operators of the largest grain port in Europe. Laura had a diverse business supplying direct-to-consumer and commodity markets. Most notably, we spoke of the different quality classifications of premium bred wheat in France, all red wheats, of course. So of great interest to me was the premium Label Rouge designation for optimal French bred wheat. Label Rouge quality parameters not only include specific varieties and technical specifications, but input allowances and assurances of farm sustainability. This was underpinned by documentation which Laura found a hassle but necessary, and she said certification documentation underpinning our day-to-day farming is like the thick end of the iceberg. If you don't see it coming, you'll sink. Finally, my people I visited that I'm going to tell you about, here's a story of Riverina farmers, Chris and Sam Greenwood. They farm organically and conventionally, mostly grain that goes into another great Australian business, Voyager Craft Malt. While Voyager malts the grain for the Greenwoods, it's the farmer that has the direct relationships with the brewers, and there's 40 of them, and they grow barley and wheat for these brewers, and each of their plots has a sign that says this is their barley. The brewers and distillers visit often, bearing gifts, and the Greenwoods get free beer and whiskey made from their own grain. So these brewers and distillers and their customers are very interested in provenance and traceability, sustainability and diversity. They want a malted product to use in their beer and that is local as possible. And the heritage variety schooner variety grows in a particular way and has a flavour profile that achieves the results that they would otherwise only get if they imported a UK malted product with a large emissions bill. So schooner barley yields a lot less than, say, Planet, but the Greenwoods benchmark the pricing against Planet yields. Plus there's a price premium anyway, just for doing something different. And guess what? During the last drought, the brewers that they supply called them up and asked how they were going. They asked what kind of price they needed to break even that year, despite already having set a price. The brewers paid another $100 a tonne for that year's barley. They put this price into the beer and told their customers why, which the customers understood. This happened 2 years in a row, and the following year the Greenwoods had a cracker and dropped the price to thank the brewers. This kind of mutual understanding only happens with direct relationships. That is also more profitable, despite the extra complexity is one thing, but for the Greenwoods, the direct relationship makes their farming way more enjoyable. So here's a table of 4 additional silos of quality linked to consumer values: sustainability, provenance, health and diversity. Increasingly, the broader industry is being asked to respond to these values too, just as CBH's chair detailed yesterday. They fit within what might be nourishment, a quite nebulous term. So nutritional density, ease of digestion, ecological soundness, food sovereignty and authentic connection to source. And of course, flavour. On flavour, you just don't sit back after a great meal and rub your belly and go, geez, that was sustainable. You know, it's delicious. So it's hard to sell something distinct from the usual if it isn't actually better, particularly if it doesn't taste better. Alternative grain mechanisms prioritise flavour, often seek to link sustainability, growing method and nutritional value with flavour as part of their messaging to consumers. These values can be the basis of a strong story, connecting customers directly with farms and strong branding as a result. This branding can travel far, well beyond what claims of sustainability should allow. What we do here well, people in other countries want, and they'll buy it. The alternative grain systems have close links between participants, usually in a local context, while being linked to similar mechanisms globally. Across all of them, a diversity of genetics, processing and products are offered, many via on-farm value-add enterprises. They also increasingly have direct links to research institutions unfiltered by consultancy. Community and direct connection to local consumers is key, and it's a strange paradox that they end up with global branding recognition and potential for growth beyond capacity and their original localised vision. As far as incorporating different traits in our breeding, I asked Intergrain's senior wheat breeder, Dan Mullen, about this, and he said that breeding is complex, of course, and despite the gene and data analysis tools available to us, adding extra layers of screening increases program cost and risk, and it's like looking for a smaller needle in a larger haystack. It's also divergent from core business. So for the figures focused amongst us, what does a single tonne of grain represent in a value-added craft market system? And don't get too excited about these figures, they're not profit. They're just an indication of how value can jump once consumer values are integrated and communicated. So 1 tonne of grain can represent $10,000 worth of retail flour, $10,000 worth of artisan bread, $100,000 worth of beer, $200,000 worth of whiskey. If these products have the full story encompassing sustainability, provenance, genetic diversity, including direct relationships with the farmer, the value can jump dramatically, particularly if a brand has been built and has been more widely recognised. A tonne of barley can equate to $200,000 worth of beer sales and between $500,000 and even $2 million for a Tasmanian award-winning whisky. Not that it'd be an old and rare whisky at 5,000 litres, but anyway. So the price difference is story, telling the difference of story, telling the story of difference. Story's worth a lot. Story can start with what is distinct about the grain. Story can start at your farm. It can even stay on your farm until later in the supply chain if you're keen for a bit of complexity. Story is what builds brand. And brand is worth even more because it can grow and it can travel. Just think of how the Europeans protect their champagne, San Marzano tomatoes and cheese. It takes time, but we can build that kind of value in Australia too. There's actually a 5-tonne craft malting plant being installed on a WA farm right now, so I hope it's one of yours. That said, it's not always about the money, and I was very happy to receive this photo yesterday from Western Australian scholar and Ben Cubban farmer, Nick Gillett, to whom I sent not even 100 kilos of Ben Cubban variety of wheat a few years ago. Ben Cubban was the leading wheat in Australia from 1930 to 1950, and Nick is celebrating his local agriculture with this beer and bags of flour at his local shops as an aside to his main enterprise. There are many lessons for businesses like mine and larger growers looking to take a stake elsewhere in the value chain and enjoy direct relationships with end users. As for the broader industry, there are potential avenues for diversity in what we grow in Australia and how we might present our grain to a large discerning market on our doorstep, increasingly interested in consumer values. Which brings us back to Van Gogh. Just like wheat, the price of one of his paintings can be compelling, but this doesn't encompass the value of its true worth, just like wheat. So thank you.